Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Well, welcome to Getting to Know You. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're talking to Patrick Morelli. He's an artist, and a sculptor, and a photographer, a digital artist, and an architectural designer. He lives right here in Colonie, in Loudonville. And he has done a lot of work, what you would call public art. Two of his most famous works, I guess you could say, is a big, you'll see this picture on your screen, a September 11th memorial down in West Orange, New York. It's called Eagle Rock. But today we're going to be talking to him about his statue, which you'll now see on the screen. It's called Behold. It overlooks the tomb of Dr. Martin Luther King in Atlanta. And he's going to tell us about his work and public art. And he's going to be here at the library on Tuesday night, April 24th at 6:30. He's going to tell the whole story. So today we're going to get a little preview. So welcome, Patrick.
Thanks, Joe. I'm glad to be here.
Now, Patrick, you went to Duke University in Syracuse. Before we start talking about public art and your work, why don't you give us the capsule biography, I like to say, because you didn't start out as an artist and a sculptor. How did you, just give us your little life story in a
Okay, I started out as a very creative child, and then I got into the what do you want to be when you grow up thing. And what I wanted to be, I guess, was teaching at a university level. I really, really enjoy teaching. I still do some of it at Siena College and so on. And but then after I left Duke University, I started working in business. The last job as a national salesperson for Prudential Steamship Lines in a World Trade Center the year it opened. About in my early 30s, all of a sudden something clicked that I was happy but restless. And I started taking art at the Art Students League in Manhattan. And a year later, just walked into my boss's office and quit. Started a new career all over in my early 30s, struggling like any artist, waiting on tables to stay alive and trying to rebuild a career.
Okay, so your work is mainly what I guess you would call public art. Before we talk about some of your work, what's public art as opposed to?
Well, I guess it's art that's intended to be seen by a wide audience. Very often it deals on major themes. They might be as serious as the 9/11 memorial, which, by the way, is in West Orange, New Jersey.
Oh, okay. What did I say?
In New York.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. And or the Behold Monument overlooking Dr. King's tomb, or they might be something that is just decorative and playful, but it's like the Alice in Wonderland bronzes in Central Park on which children play and so on. But they're meant to be seen by thousands of people in person, and very often now with the internet, maybe 1 billion people worldwide.
And then one of your other, I guess you could say, famous pieces, which you'll see on the screen as we're talking, in the Syracuse Football Hall of Fame, you have a bust of probably their most famous football player, Jim Brown. So
that was an exciting experience. After I had had an exhibition at Lubin House, which is the SU alumni house in Manhattan, they said, look, we want to do a bronze bust of Jim Brown. And I said, well, you know, I'd like to be considered. He said, no, we'd like you to do it. Yeah. So I did this monumental bronze bust of Jim Brown. And it was exciting because I got to meet him in person, spend some time with him, talking and photographing him and so on. And he was as imposing at about, I think he was about 62 at the time, as he was when he was a football player. So we ended up doing this heroic size bronze bust from the waist up, and unveiling it at halftime of the Syracuse-Rutgers game. And they had 54,000 people there, which was fantastic. And since it's my hometown of Syracuse, I got a lot of people from the crowd giving me a hard time. And then one piece went out to his home in Los Angeles as a gift from the university.
All right, now I'll just say before we start talking about Behold, your work is in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian Institute American Art Museum in Washington, the Tennessee State Museum, the Pepsi-Cola corporate collection, and I just mentioned the Syracuse Hall of Fame, but some of your work is also in the private collections of people like Rudolph Giuliani, Supreme Court Justice Alito, and the estate of Alex Haley. Now, Alex Haley will be playing a part in this story. So the Behold statue, this was a long 10-year process, and it's quite the story, which is what you're going to be talking about when you come to the library on April 24th. But I guess how, or I guess maybe it's, I don't know, how or why. What was the genesis of why you wanted to make this Behold statue? It's obviously, let's tell the story of how it all started.
Well, as I mentioned, I started my whole art career in my early 30s, and was very much attracted to universal themes, not isolated to any one event or people or whatever. And so when I read Alex Haley's book and saw the ABC miniseries Roots, the central scene, the baptism scene, struck me immediately as a beautiful, powerful, and universal celebration of courage and of hope for the future and so on. So I did the small 15-inch Behold piece, which you're showing here, and wanted to sell small castings of the piece in bronze. And I had some good fortune. I ended up going out to Burbank and selling the first 4 to David Wolper, the Roots producer, and he gave one to Alex Haley, one to his executive producer, and one to the head writer of Roots. And I said, there's only 15 of these, and I really, really wanted them to go to somebody special, and Coretta Scott King seemed perfect, this woman of great courage and so on, who had done so much for human rights.
But they were the size of this one right here?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
These were the collector's edition, and the interpretation of the collector's edition is from the thighs up, but the 10-foot piece is from the feet up. So I wrote to Mrs. King, and I said, I'd like to present this to you, and Ben Hooks, who is then executive director, national director of NAACP, is a good friend, him and his wife Frances, and I said, Ben, would you present this piece on my behalf to Mrs. King? So I followed up with a phone call, and Mrs. King's secretary said, yeah, she'd like to receive the piece, but she wants you to come down to give it to her. I said, well, wow. So I went down there. This was in 1980. I met Mrs. King. I met Daddy King, Martin's father, who was tremendous, tremendous individual. And if you read his history, he was a man of great courage. You could see Dr. King's roots in his father, who was a great champion, a very proud person, and champion of human rights. And I met him, I met Mrs. King, I met Bernice King, who was 17 at the time, the King children, and Dexter, and so on. And many people, major people in the civil rights movement, John Lewis, and so many other people. So I proposed at the time that I said, Mrs. King, I would like to do this piece, 10 feet, here as a permanent piece, dedicated to Dr. King, overlooking his tomb. And I met with Mrs. King and board trustees and so on. They loved the idea, and they said, we'll give you a site, even though it's a National Historic Site, we'll give you a site, but we can't give you any money for it. So I said, well, this is, what a privilege it would be to do this piece. So I'm going to devote at least a year of my life to this. Well, it was 1980. It turns out the whole project was not completed until 1990, after I raised $250,000 in donations, sale of my artwork, donations from everything from the foundries and the granite people to the Teamsters, who donated the transportation of the piece from the New York City foundry to Atlanta.
But you said you had this size here that we're looking at. When you met Mrs. King, were you thinking about a temp, or did all of a sudden you just say, hey, I just want to do a...
Well, it's a cliche that sculptors always think big.
Yeah.
Always think big, all the time. And I certainly am among that crowd. And when you come down to the King National Historic Site in Atlanta, which I would urge everyone to do, it is one of the most important cultural and human treasures that the United States has. There's Dr. King's tomb. There's Dr. King's birth home. There's the King Center, which is the biggest repository of archival work of Dr. King, and a visitor center. And this place has grown enormously. 1 million people a year go to the King Center. And I saw this and I said, wouldn't it be magnificent for this piece to be 10 feet in view of Dr. King's tomb? So it was, for me, an almost instant inspiration that this be done.
So all those places you just talked about are all in the same site?
Yes.
All right.
In fact, as it turned out, and fate plays such an important part in this whole Behold project, this Behold project ended up being almost like the axis of a wheel, because to one place is Ebenezer Baptist Church, the original, where Daddy King and Dr. King, then Dr. King's tomb as you move left, then the King Center, then Dr. King, the birth home, and then the new visitor center, which they built, then the new Ebenezer Baptist Church, all in a focus around this Behold monument, which is the only monumental piece that's on the entire property.
So it's right in sort of the center?
Absolute center. It wasn't intended that way.
Yeah.
It was only intended to be a relationship to Dr. King's tomb, but as it turned out, like I say, by fate, the new church went up, the visitor center went up, and now this piece has become an integral part of the National Historic Site. In fact, they just published a poster with Dr. King's image and Mrs. King and important people of the Civil Rights Movement, and they included the Behold monument image very prominently as part of this poster.
So you're saying over 1 million people a year go?
Yes,
okay.
I've seen the National Park Service says 750,000 to about 1 million will visit the King Center. And then, of course, via internet and documentary programs, everything from Good Morning America to all sorts of New York Times, maybe 1 billion people around the world have seen this piece. And during the Olympics, they published brochures and pamphlets and hardcover books on Atlanta, on the King Center, and Behold, which were translated into editions in Japanese, German, French, Italian, Spanish, and who knows how many other languages.
It's been there now for what, 22 years?
Yep,
Do you occasionally hear from people about
all
their
the time.
impressions when they see it? What are some of the things people?
Well, you know, an artist, no matter what his or her craft is, whether it's dance or acting or sculpture, always wonders, how does my art affect people? And so it's so gratifying to get an email from people all over the world who say, we've been to the King Center, King National Historic Site, we've seen the Behold Monument, a 10-foot Behold Monument, and it was such an inspiration to us and our family. And the even more gratifying part is it's not defined by race. People of all nationalities and countries, and the United States, of course, send me a letter or an email, or just meet me on the street and say, oh, I know that piece, I was down there, and whatever. So that is really a nice thing.
All right, so now you keep saying this is a 10-year process. Why don't you talk a little bit about, and like I say, for people watching, Patrick's going to be here on April 24th. It's a Tuesday night at the library at 6:30 to tell the whole story. He has a big PowerPoint presentation with, I don't know, a couple hundred
Right,
pictures.
it's only about 40 minutes, but the slides are, I think, pretty interesting.
Well, so tell us, I guess, how do you go from 15-inch here to 10 feet? Talk about this process, and we do have some pictures that, as you're talking, we'll be showing a little bit.
All right. Well, bronze casting, for most people who do it, is a 4-stage process, at least for me, where my work is highly detailed and refined. You go from the clay model, which is a starting point. Then it's cast into, mold is taken, cast into plaster, which is refined further with sandpaper and tools and so on. And then another mold is taken, is cast into wax, which is refined and so on, with a hot tool.
This is 10 feet.
No, this is just 15 inches.
Oh, okay, all right.
Because this 4-part process takes place for any size.
Oh, okay.
Then when you get to the fourth and final part, the wax is cast in a bronze foundry into bronze. It's called the lost wax process, and very simply, as molten bronze is poured into the mold at 1800 degrees, the wax melts out, replaced by the bronze, and then that takes a lot of finishing. So there's 4 steps. So if you want that piece to be bigger, you start with your 15-inch piece, and you scale it up. It's called pointing. It's just a technical term, but you actually scale it up to the size you want it. And in this case, it was 10 feet. And then when it's scaled up, it's pretty rough, and you basically start all over again, refining the clay, then casting it into plaster, finishing the plaster, casting it into wax and retouching it, casting it into bronze, and finishing it, and so on. And that's basically what we did.
So now, did you use a model, or did you have pictures from the roots, or how did you?
Well, it was everything.
It obviously looks like a slave, right? I mean.
Well, yeah, Kunta Kinte, who was the real-life model in Alex Haley's book, his ancestor, was an African slave, and the Behold baptism scene was an ancient African ritual in which Africans would raise their newborn child to the heavens and say, "Behold, the only thing greater than yourself," meaning have pride and dignity because nothing is greater than you except God. And so that ritual was brought to the United States, and the piece, of course, then represents it, but for me has a very universal application because it represents the hope of all fathers for their children and the difficulty the father went through, and you see the vulnerability of the baby. These are universal emotions and feelings that I tried to translate into the piece.
Now, in the course of this 10-year process, can you talk a little bit about, before the permanent one was done, you had a 10-foot, it was in plaster, that was at the World Trade Center? What was?
We were, as I'm trying to raise money for this 10-foot permanent bronze Behold piece that's going overlooking Dr. King's tomb at the King National Historic Site, I got to the plaster stage where I had the second stage. I had this piece 10 feet in plaster and finished. And of course, I wanted to generate publicity for it and so on.
But you still needed money for the.
Yes, I'm raising $250,000 in donations, sale of artwork, donation of services, and so on and so on. And trying to stay alive in Manhattan, the King Center, newly formed King Center, Governor Mario Cuomo at the time had just started, signed into law, or signed a bill creating the New York State Martin Luther King Commission. And I presented it to them, and they loved this idea and sponsored as their first public event the unveiling of the first public unveiling of the 10-foot plaster model for Behold at 2 World Trade Center. And it was wonderful because it was there at the on the mezzanine at the entrance to the exhibition level of the World Trade Center. So maybe 10,000 people a day would file by waiting to go up to the observation deck, and they would see this piece. And as fate would have it, many people said this would be a magnificent piece for the World Trade Center. Let's see if we'll get the Port Authority in New York, New Jersey to underwrite it. And that idea was presented to somebody and rejected. And again, fate, that had that piece been accepted and put into the World Trade Center, it would now have been pulverized into nothing. It would not even exist. And so that was a fateful type of thing.
Well, people had, that was just on the screen as we were talking, but so how did you, and the plaster one looked, it looks just like the permanent one, right?
It's exact, wax to the bronze, yes.
All right, so now how did you end up, or how long did it take to get the $250,000? I mean,
in 1990 money.
So this was about the World Trade Center plaster was what, halfway through the process?
It was December 10th, 1985.
All right, so you're halfway. And you were still planning for the 10th.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. That was the dream, but now it's going into its 5th year. This 1-year plan I had, and I always laughed about the saying that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Well, how true that was with me in this project. So I get this call from the King Center saying that Mrs. King is getting set to schedule as King Week activities in 1986 to celebrate the first national celebration of Dr. King's birthday. And she would like to see this Behold monument unveiled at the King Center in Atlanta, but on Dr. King's actual birthday, which was January 15th. And I just, by some miracle, was able to get money together to cast this piece into material called a bonded bronze. It's a polyester resin and bronze powder. It's very much like a fiberglass. It's exact to the bronze. It's a museum quality material. In fact, the piece I have in the Smithsonian is this material. And we drove it down, I drove it down to the King Center 3 days before the 15th. It was installed, and on January 15th, 1986, Mrs. King unveiled this indoor version of the 10-foot Behold monument. And there were 700 reporters from around the world covering the King Week activities. And it was like a who's who. Mandela's daughter from South Africa, Jesse Jackson, Bush, who I'm not sure what he was at the time, it was vice president or what he was, Peter Jennings, and so on and so on, like Cesar Chavez. It was like a who's who list was all there and covered, and I was interviewed by Good Morning America. The press covered.
This is 87?
1986, the first national celebration, Dr. King's birthday. But this was only a middle stage because we were still working toward the bronze.
Well, people will see that on the screen as we were just talking. What is it? What do you mean an indoor version?
Well, a bonded bronze is polyester resin. It's like a fiberglass. It's durable outdoors, but it won't hold the color and so on. It's more susceptible to extremes of hot and cold. And for a monumental piece, of course,
it wouldn't last.
It would last. You'll see pieces out there, but like I say, the patina, the covering, and it's more. But you would want bronze for any meaningful, permanent outdoor piece.
Okay. So from 87, so what's the next?
The next step is...
Now, were you, during all this, how did you support, you were doing other stuff, obviously. You didn't just work on it.
No, I didn't. Other things were going in between, besides waiting on tables at every deli in Manhattan, which was a main cause of support. And then every time I sold a piece, my wife, my girlfriend at the time, Amy, would call it the Miracle of the Month Club. Just when we were running out of money for rent and for the project, we'd sell one of the small bronzes, and or something would happen, or I'd get a little commission, the Jim Brown commission, or not the Jim Brown commission, the U.S. Congressman Bill Chappell in Florida, and this would keep the thing going. Then the New Jersey King Commission purchased the indoor version of that Mrs. King had dedicated. And this was a huge help because I took the profit from that piece and poured it back into the bronze casting thing.
All right, so you're slowly getting...
Right.
Now, why was it hard to raise money? You think that, or was it the times, or were...
every project that of this scope is always, money is always raised for by committee. What does the committee do? The committee has the legitimacy. They have the contacts. They're usually very powerful and wealthy people in the community, and it's a standard and understandable way of doing it. This was not a committee or a competition. This was an independent project presented by a sculptor who had no reputation. This was his first piece. So trying to gain credibility depended 100% on people's belief in Dr. King's dream, and the belief in the importance of the monument, and their belief in me. So it was something that all had to come together, and there were what I call angels along the way, without whose help this piece could have never.
Well, you had the 15-inch ones and the 10-foot ones, which obviously were very, I'm sure must have inspired some people to
absolutely.
Give money.
And the sale of the photographic enlargement and speaking engagements and so on. It was really scrambling. It's a type of project, $250,000 with the right funding could have been done in a few months.
Yeah.
You know, but anyway, you deal with what you have, and I knew this was a special opportunity and privilege of a lifetime. So I just said, I'm going to do this.
All right. So 87 to 90. What was the final? I guess the final steps there.
Well, again, I was raising money and so on, and the piece was then got to a point where we started the casting in bronze, and we could set a date of around January 11th, 1990 as the unveiling. This was during King Week, which is celebrated every year at the King National Historic Site in Atlanta, and I had to get it money to get it transported. Takes a lot of money. It's a 10-foot piece, over 1,000 pounds. And I met with the Teamsters, and they were great. I said, look, I got to get this piece down to
From New York to Atlanta?
Yeah, from New York to Atlanta. And they said, are you a union member? And I said, I am, but I was a union member of the steel mill because my dad had worked in a steel mill all his life. He was immigrated from Italy when he was 16, worked in a steel mill in Syracuse, New York, and it was a great job. It supported the family and was really wonderful. And I worked there in the summer, so I would join the steel. And so I said, no, I'm not. It's not trucking. It's steel. He goes, that's okay. So they donated. You know, this was a lot. I said, another miracle. And sure enough, they put it on a flatbed truck and they transported it down to Atlanta for installation in fall of 1989.
Okay. Did they have to drive? I mean, did they have to drive slower? Or
no, it was. You know, it's professionally crated and packed and so on, and they, I'm sure, deal with delicate or important works of art and other things. And no, yeah, but of course, you're worrying the entire way.
I would think.
There's 10 years of my life going down on a truck. What's going to happen?
So you finally, it's 1990, it's King Week. Now at the dedication, you had many, many dignitaries. Maybe you could talk about that. Plus, you were telling me you had some protests by the Ku Klux Klan?
Well, what happened with this is that, first of all, I do want to mention that New York City Board of Education had hired me to devise special art education programs for students in the 5 boroughs, Brooklyn, Queens, and so on. And the Behold Art Education Program was one of them, in which I had students I would teach, and then they would go out to the Foundry in Queens and actually work on this piece. It might be
They could see the process.
Yeah, it's not only see it, but actually touch the piece and work on certain finishing of certain parts. It might be the first time in history when students actually worked on a national monument and got the so on, and many of them came down for the unveiling.
Students helped you on the final permanent.
The 10-foot piece, yeah, they go down there and file the bronze, and I'd be like looking at them like, okay, you know. Right. But it was really, really wonderful. So what happened is on January 11, 1990, John Amos, who's been a great friend and supporter, played Kunta Kinte in Roots, came down for the unveiling, and then he and Mrs. King and I unveiled the 10-foot permanent Behold monument overlooking Dr. King's tomb. And it was just wonderful. We had this picture perfect day, and it was covered by Associated Press and the Atlanta Constitution. It was an experience of a lifetime. My mom and dad, and mom and dad who were in their 80s, who, you have to remember, my dad came from Italy as an immigrant at 16, and here he is, many years later, meeting Mrs. King and having his son dedicating this piece and saying, well, gee, maybe he's not a doctor or a lawyer, but he did something meaningful. And my mom, of course, I couldn't do enough, and this was very special. My brother Sam and Joe came down and so on, and it was really, really good. So we had a wonderful unveiling, but that was January 11th. On January 21st, 11 days later, I came back to.
Oh, this is after the ceremony.
After everything's done. That's why this Behold is a project that is of tremendous cultural and historical significance, because it's part of the American mainstream. It's not just an art exhibit that's done and then is gone with the wind. This is now part of American culture, and it keeps appearing in magazines and in front page of New York Times, Fortune magazine, and so on. So it's really a living testament to Dr. King's courage, because the inscription that I had incised on the base was dedicated to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for his moral courage and nobility of spirit. This is something that, a very powerful monument that carries on the message of Dr. King. And it continues to grow. But 11 days later, the Behold project's not over, because the Ku Klux Klan had gotten a permit from the National Park Service, which by law they're allowed to do, protesting the creation of the King holiday. Why?
Oh, that was the same year as the 1990 you're talking about.
Yeah, it was 11 days later. January 11th, Mrs. King unveiled the permanent 10-foot Behold bronze. 11 days later.
And they were protesting at this?
At the King National Historic Site. And they were why are you giving a national holiday to a black person? Of course, that wasn't their language, but that's what they said. And I went down there for this, and they had 2,600 National Guardsmen, Georgia FBI, Atlanta Police, and National Park Service people ringing the entire King National Historic Site to protect Dr. King's tomb, the King family, the King home, and all of anyone visiting at the King Center at that time. And it was pretty powerful visual images, which are part of this presentation on Behold on April 24th, showing how even in 1990, which was not Civil War days, it was not hundreds of years ago, only 25 years ago, racism was and still is alive. It's just that now maybe the racist doesn't wear Ku Klux Klan robes, maybe it's something more subtle. But it was a very, very powerful lesson to be learned from that experience.
Okay. Well, now, before we finish here, I'll mention one more time. You've heard some of the story. Patrick's going to give the full story, April 24th, 6:30 here in the library, down in the big room. He's got a big presentation. You can go to his website also. It's morelliart.com. It'll be on the screen. All his work, you can see little pictures of a lot of the things he's been talking about. And we've only scratched the surface, I think. So you're going to tell the whole story. But before we're done, what are you working on these days? Do you have anything? Working on something now is going to take 10 years, are you?
I hope not.
But do you have any commissions that you're going to be?
Well, I'm now in the running for a few major commissions.
Oh, okay.
I can't talk about it. It's a finalist type thing. We'll see how it
these
works.
these are outdoor?
Like a competition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're major type of pieces. We'll see how that goes. Give it my best shot and see what happens. I'm doing a lot of public presentations on the Behold Monument. I just did one at the King Center, in fact, and we have the one scheduled on the 24th. And I do also public presentations on the Eagle Rock September 11th Memorial in West Orange, New Jersey, which has all 2,900 names of all the people who have perished in 9/11 attacks, and up for National Historic Site status. So I'm doing that type of thing. I do some university teaching when I have a chance to do that. I always enjoy that. And other than that, I'm trying to raise a 17-year-old daughter who just got her license, which, if you want to talk about major projects, that's a major project.
Well, maybe I would say you told me the whole story, the mini version of the September 11th Eagle Rock, so we're going to have you back for that sometime.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, Patrick, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Enjoyed
for
it.
those watching, that's Tuesday night, April 24th, 6:30 here in the library. You can hear the whole story and meet Patrick and ask him any question about this. So that's it for Getting to Know You, and we'll see you next time.